Hello, my name is Arid Zaman, and I'm Executive Director of the Commonwealth Business Women's Network. And we are one of the partners in the United Nations Global Compact Target Gender Equality Coalition. We're very proud to be members of that. And the Commonwealth Business Women's Network is the only organization that's recognized by the 54 Commonwealth governments specifically for our work in the area of women's economic empowerment and women in leadership. And we're also very proud members of the global network for civil society in disaster risk reduction, and therefore I'm delighted that today on this special session on gender responsive disaster risk reduction, a Commonwealth perspective, I'm being joined here by Lisa Hernandez from GNDR. So welcome, Lisa. Good to have you with us.
Thank you, Rafe. Thank you for having me. My name is Lisa Hernandez. I am the regional lead for Americas and the Caribbean, and I represent the global network of civil society organizations for disaster reduction. Glad to be here and glad to be able to present our approach specifically on the risk drivers of disaster management and how do we are actually tackling the gender inequality.
So I think we're going to begin with a short video, which we'll play now, and then after that we'll come back in a moment.
One of the major barriers to risk-informed development, which interconnects with other drivers of risk, is gender inequality. Unless development is systematically gender transformative, we will see disasters placing women into intractable cycles of poverty. Women and girls are disproportionately affected by disasters and, whilst often being the first responders, are regularly discriminated against when recovery and rehabilitation efforts take place. The feminization of poverty refers to the phenomenon that women and girls are disproportionately represented among the world's poor compared to men. According to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, women are the world's poor. In almost all societies, women have higher poverty rates than men. In fact, among the 1.5 billion people living on $1 or less a day, the majority are women and children. GNDR works in communities where women play different roles, not only as mothers or sisters, but also as transformational leaders. Today we will hear from two community workers and leaders and their effort on empowering women on developing distinct ways of building resilience relevant to their particular context and factors. First, we will learn from Santa Sandoval, a community leader working with social services of Dominican Church and strong worker who provides training and counseling on DRR for women in rural Afro-descendant communities in Dominican Republic.
Fantástico, porque trabajar con mujeres es lo mejor. Las mujeres siempre se están diligentes, siempre se están dispuestas a hacer los trabajos. Cada vez que estamos en una comunidad y vamos a hacer cualquier actividad o cualquier tipo de trabajo, alguna jornada de limpieza de la comunidad o cuando vamos a dar cualquier taller, las primeras son las mujeres y las que están presentes son las mujeres y el mayor número de asistentes a cualquier actividad también son las mujeres. Tenemos varias experiencias, por ejemplo, no solamente en esta comunidad, sino en otras comunidades donde trabajamos el tema de gestión de riesgo de desastre y la resiliencia. Ya tenemos mujeres empoderadas que son las líderes de la comunidad y cuando hay cualquier evento adverso, solamente nosotros tenemos que llamar por teléfono y preguntar qué están haciendo. Inmediatamente nos dan un listado de las acciones que están tomando, qué están haciendo para prevenir mayores daños. En cualquier actividad siempre están dispuestas, como dije anteriormente, y ya se ha delegado en ellas funciones que antes teníamos que hacer nosotros personalmente, ya se ha delegado en ellas, en muchas de las líderes de la comunidad, y son ellas las que accionan, en las que toman la iniciativa de hacer cualquier cosa antes de un evento y después de un evento también accionan y vuelven a la vida normal, como que ya ellas son todas unas expertas.
One of the 7 principles that guide our approach is ensure the inclusion of all groups, particularly those most at risk, including people with disabilities. We must recognize the intersectionality of discrimination that leads to vulnerability, and how special attention we must be given to people living in poverty and in vulnerable situations. Now, let's hear from Janet Ruiz, working with Refugee Education Trust, or RED International, a GNDR member since 2017. Janet is a community trainer working in rural indigenous communities in Panama.
Hola, soy Janet Ruiz. Soy parte de Red Internacional, una organización que tiene más de 3 años de ser parte de la GNDR. En Red trabajamos en comunidades a través de intervenciones específicas para solucionar necesidades. En este sentido, la estrategia GNDR ha fortalecido nuestro trabajo diario, ya que juntos podemos amplificar las voces de las comunidades para que sean incluidas en las estrategias nacionales. En Red, los jóvenes y en especial las jóvenes mujeres son pilares de nuestro trabajo diario y creemos mucho en su potencial y la forma en que pueden influir en los procesos para liderar su propio camino hacia la reconstrucción de sociedades mucho más resilientes. Hemos trabajado en el empoderamiento y prueba de ello es el caso de Rosy y Suyen, quienes han sido formadas para poder brindar capacitación sobre las normas de protección, atención e inclusión de las personas con discapacidad en momentos de emergencia y desastre.
At GNDR, we are learning from the local reality and will share the learning, particularly coming from women. In the next 5 years, women leading at the front line of disasters will mentor other women like Santa or Janet, Rosy or Sujen. They all share vulnerabilities and have learned to collaborate with others, especially among women, to strengthen their capacities to build self-resilience, and we will be there to support and learn with them.
Thank you, Ari, for the opportunity. On the video, we're able to hear the testimonies of women leaders working all over the world in the global network, and how they are facing the challenges of being a woman and also being the first responders when disaster attacks. So thinking about that, GNDR has a new strategy launched last year, and it's focusing to be working in the next five years. It's local leadership for global impact. The importance of this strategy is that was developed by our members. GNDR has more than 105,000 civil society organizations as members, and its presence is in 130 countries. So the main idea of this strategy is to connect the front line of civil society entities with national and international policymakers, institutions, and governments. We influence policies and practices by amplifying the voices of people most at risk. With that in mind, the main vision of this strategy is a world in which everyone works together to strengthen the resilience of people most at risk and prevent hazards for becoming disasters. For that, to be able to implement our strategy in the 13 regions that GNDR has presence in the world, we are focusing our strategy in 3 main goals. And among those goals, we also identify 6 risk drivers. From them, we are able to see that these 6 drivers are where most of the disaster management are being handled. One is for displacement, the second is gender inequality, food and water insecurity, urbanizations, climate change, and conflict. So among those, you will be, in this session, you will be listening from different members, women that are leaders in their communities, facing all these kind of different risks, and how are they being able to identify solutions within their own communities. Back to you, Arif.
Thank you very much, Liza. And I think the importance of this issue was brought home to the Commonwealth Business Women's Network when we were part of the delegation from Commonwealth, both from the Commonwealth Secretariat and from Commonwealth civil society organisations that attended the global platform for convened by the UN Disaster Risk Reduction in May 2019. And for that, this was clearly about 8 months or so before the pandemic. But from that, in our delegation, we came away with a very clear position in that disaster risk, the gender responsive reduction, we felt requires analysing and taking into account the needs, opportunities, roles and relationships of women, boys and girls formed by gender norms within a given context. And that gender equalities often increase the vulnerability of women and girls because they limit their access to information and resources. Recognising and committing to a strong focus on gender in disaster risk reduction, ensuring women's leadership at all levels and recognising their contribution to disaster risk governance is critical to achieving the ambitious targets set out in the Sendai framework. And the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction talks about the importance of gender. We think that the importance of women's voices in a Commonwealth context is really vital to hear. And that's why I'm delighted that we're able to hear now from three women from the Commonwealth Business Women's Network to talk about these issues. And we're going to listen to them now.
Hi, my name is Helen Zahos. I'm the National Focal Point for GNDR in Australia, as well as the Health and Disaster Risk Reduction Advisor for the Commonwealth Business Women's Network. I've been asked today to answer a question for you here on the global platform. Now, CBWN have actually put a statement up on the global platform on this topic, on gender inequality in DRR. So I encourage you to read that, but I will answer this question. Firstly, though, I will quickly mention that awareness around gender inequality in disaster risk reduction is not new. Well, it's fairly new, probably the last decade, probably the last 5 years, definitely. It has been a topic or an issue that keeps being raised now at a global level in meetings on disaster. It's appearing more and more in strategies and frameworks. And what I mean by that is the Sendai framework back in 2015 talks about an all-inclusive approach to disaster risk reduction. And also earlier this year in Nairobi, the Commonwealth Women's Affairs Ministerial meeting addressed gender issues or raised gender inequality as an issue in disaster risk reduction. So that was a topic that was discussed there. Our very own GNDR as part of their strategy. So if you look at for 2020 to 2025, have actually identified gender inequality as one of their 6 risk drivers for disaster. So I applaud them for including that in their strategy. So it's a topic that, more and more is becoming recognised as an important topic, and we really, really need to address this. So there's an awareness there. We are talking more and more about it. It's, appearing in our strategies. Why haven't we acted on it, or why aren't we acting on it? What are our barriers? So our barriers, I think, only just briefly, is that it's cultural. Historically, it's been men that have dominated the disaster risk reduction space, or disaster in general. So whether we're looking at, men sitting at the table, developing strategies, formulating frameworks around disaster risk reduction, whether it's men dominating the first responders or the initial response to a disaster. So, this is a historical trend. This is nothing new. We know this. So how do we change that culture? How do we change this trend? I think we need to look at our own organisations. We're all part of different civil society organisations being part of GNDR. And I challenge you to look at your own organisation and have a look at who is sitting at the table making decisions around disaster risk reduction, Are there women there? Do you have women leaders around you? Do you have young up-and-coming women that you can mentor to put into leadership roles in the future, or even to put into a disaster risk reduction role and encourage them to move up into a leadership role one day? Mentor them. So I think that possibly could be the first step. But I think the best thing that we are doing is, we've raised awareness, we're talking about it, it's on the table, it's in our strategy. And I look forward to 2025 in 5 years' time and seeing how far we have come in gender inequality and perhaps bridging that gap that does exist in disaster risk reduction, looking at it through the gender lens. So thank you very much for participating on this global platform, and I'll hand you over to some other people that have some questions to be answered. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the week during this global platform. Look forward to working with you all a little bit more closely too. Thank you. Take care from Australia.
My name is Lisa Fabian, the Executive Director of Dominica Association of Industry and Commerce and the Network of Caribbean Chambers of Commerce. I believe that localization can certainly be an enabler of gender equality. One may ask why. I believe this is true because when opportunities are viewed at the grassroots level, we are better able to determine its impact. It has been agreed at the UN Global Platform on Disaster Risk Reduction in May 2019 that voices of women should be included at the grassroots level and localized to enable gender equality. You may ask, what would this look like? This could be seen through initiatives which are taken at the local level, which includes the private sector, community-based organizations, local government, academia, among many others. Think for a moment at the grassroots level and through these organizations and institutions that you may be aware of. Are the opportunities greater there for the women at these local levels, or is it more easily seen through the global levels? I believe that decentralization and localization of resources and also the allocation of these resources reflect the true value of investing in prevention and resilience. I also propose meaningful engagement of all women in the disaster risk processes at the local levels, as this will create more opportunities for other women to be able to be supported through the same. If women are at the center of decision making and implementation, the approach is more likely to be gender informed, inclusive, and transformational. Thank you.
Drivers of risk. One of the major barriers to risk-informed development, which interconnects with all other drivers of risk, is gender inequality. Unless development is systematically gender transformative, we will see disasters placing women into intractable cycles of poverty. For transformative progress to be made in the reduction of risk and strengthening of community resilience, a focus on gender inequality is critical when understanding the drivers of risk, identifying points of focus, and designing and developing different activities. It means ensuring that women who face risks and are in vulnerable situations are empowered to provide solutions, demand rights and services, and increase access to information, and to participate in decision-making processes.
So we've just heard there from three women from different regions. Helen Zahos from Australia, who's a nurse that's worked in disaster zones. We've also heard from Dr. Josephina Ojambo, the former Deputy Secretary General of the Commonwealth Secretariat, who's also who highlighted the issues, particularly in an African context, from disasters and the issues with from weather conditions that can be impacted, then also from Liz Fabian, the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce in Dominica, who highlighted the issues in a Caribbean context. And that, I think, is very important, because the importance of engaging with the private sector is really a real opportunity here. The UN Global Compact is particularly well placed to do that. Some of you will be aware, perhaps, that there is an existing network, ARISE, the Private Sector Alliance for Disaster Resilient Societies, which is a network of private sector entities led by the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. We also have the UN Global Compact companies as well. I think what we need to do is, the feeling from the Commonwealth Business Women's Network and the Commonwealth, a number of Commonwealth colleagues, is we need to bring this dialogue together from ARISE and from UN Global Compact, and seeing how the private sector can work more closely together in this area. And that, I think, is going to become really important. So the areas that we feel to bring this together that really require action really come down to the following three areas. The first is around, as the UN Global Platform made clear in May 2019, and I quote, "Voices of women, including at the grassroots, should be reflected at all levels of development and implementation of national and local strategies." And that's something that was adopted. This aligns and affirms a decision adopted by Commonwealth Women's Affairs Ministers when they met in Nairobi in 2019 on accelerating gender equality by gender mainstreaming. So bringing women's voices in throughout the whole process, I think, is absolutely vital. And so there's a clear link there. Secondly, we feel it's important on gender and climate change, which is a Commonwealth priority. One of the 4 Commonwealth priorities for gender equality is on gender and climate change. We feel there's a real opportunity to develop gender responsive and centered approaches to disaster risk reduction, building on significant recent meetings that have been held by the Commonwealth in the last couple of years. And then thirdly, and I think this is most important of all, Liza, and I think this is one I'd like to put to you as a question. What can we do about it through working as a community and mobilizing networks? So the importance of mobilizing networks and key stakeholders from government, local as well as national, because we know there's more work to be done on local targets. The private sector, well, I've talked about that as well already. I think also research and academia, so we can better understand how these things are evolving and changing, but also make sure that we do so in a way where women are involved in those conversations, and they're part of that. So I'd like to put to you, how do you see GNDR playing a role in this through its working, as a network-based organization, working with women in different regions, especially given the fact you have members from all over the world? Liza.
Thank you, Riff. Yeah, I think it is important. Why do we prioritize gender? And gender inequality as one of the risk drivers of disaster risk reduction. And one of the major barriers to risk-informed development, which interconnects with other risk drivers, is gender inequality. Unless development is systematically gender transformative, we will see disasters placing women into untrackable cycles of poverty. What we can say from our research is across the world show that women and girls remain discriminated against in education, employment, health, political representation, and much more. So in addition, women and girls are disproportionately affected by disasters. However, they are the first responders. So are regularly discriminated against women when recovery and rehabilitation efforts takes place. So to answer your question, I think mainly what we want to achieve here by focusing on women is to strengthen their capacity so they can actually bring their voices to those international platforms, like this opportunity that you were mentioning in Nairobi. But I think we need to start harvesting the results of that meetings and include the voices of these women in different scenarios at community level, and national level, and an international level. That's why GNDR is focusing on harvesting this effort and also culturing this mobilizing movement of women when women train other women so they can actually bring their voices and what they have learned and what they have faced, and to build upon the experiences so they cannot be hit again with another disaster without being prepared. So resilience and also working with the most vulnerable population is what they bring them to the scenario, and they will take a predominant role being leading in the civil society entities.
Well, I would like to close with a call to action with a very specific focus. We had the opportunity last September of having the first ever virtual meeting of Women's Affairs Ministers. In fact, Liza, it was, I think, some 42 of them showed up out of 54. It just showed you, even though it was virtual, we had a very good turnout. But I remember very clearly the Minister for the Bahamas, who spoke at that meeting. And of course, this was just a few months after Dorian had such an impact in the Bahamas. And she highlighted the importance of women's voices. And we have a real opportunity, Eliza, because the next meeting of Women's Affairs Ministers of the Commonwealth member states is held every 3 years. That schedule has been slightly affected by the pandemic because, it may be delayed by a year or so. But the next place that's going to happen, the next venue, is going to be the Bahamas. So the Bahamas is hosting the next meeting of Women's Affairs Ministers, which is due to meet at the moment. I think it's next year in 2022. And I think certainly it's a call to action. The Commonwealth Businesswomen's Network will be very keen to work with GNDR and indeed the Arise Network and UN Global Compact and bring together a joined up conversation with the private sector. I know that the government of Bahamas will be very receptive to this, to see how we can take these discussions forward in the Caribbean. And I know that you're in Guatemala, so you're in the Caribbean. I'm here in London, but we can take these discussions forward, and in the process, we can accelerate and advance Agenda 2030 that we are all committed to. So on that note, Liza, I'd like to thank you very much for joining me today, and I'd like to thank you for joining us at this UN Global Compact session today, and this discussion on gender, and in particular on gender responsive disaster risk reduction, a Commonwealth perspective.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.